I thank the gentleman. We're going to move on to our second round of questioning, and I just want Mr. Kashkari to be aware that we may have a third round of questioning. This is going to be a 5-minute round, and I will begin. I indicated to you at the beginning that I'd have some questions about the National City Bank transaction with which PNC took over National City with the help of the Treasury Department. When you look at the money that you're giving to banks, and you're picking winners and losers, it's not arguable you're picking winners and losers. You picked a winner, PNC, and you picked a loser, National City Bank. Now, were you aware at the time that National City Bank had a relative history prior to the transaction involving PNC of being under attack by short sellers? Did you know that?
Congressman, with deep respect, it is not appropriate for me to speak about an individual institution, but I can talk generally about
well, with
these
deep
types
respect,
of
you know, you put 4,000 people out of work in the city of Cleveland. Are you taking the Fifth Amendment here?
No, sir. First of all, Congressman, as I think you know, I was born and raised in northeastern Ohio.
Listen, I'm the representative of Northeast Ohio, and I'm asking you a question.
Yes, sir.
Can you answer the question? Did you know that National City was the target of short sellers?
I think many financial institutions, including National City, were the target of short sellers.
Did you know that National City stock had been undervalued, according to Oppenheimer?
I did not know that.
Did you know that National City's debt had been overstated, according to many analysts?
I did not know that.
Did you know that credit rating agencies were given credit, literally, with pushing National City off a cliff? Did you know that?
No, sir.
Do you look at the role of credit rating agencies in terms of determining who gets troubled asset relief and who does not?
Well, Chairman, if you'll permit me to walk you through our process.
Before you start walking me, I want to be careful about where you're walking me. Let me just, can you answer the question about credit rating agencies?
We do not look at credit rating agencies when deciding who to make an investment into. May I please, sir, walk you through the process?
I'm going to keep asking you questions, sir.
Okay.
On October 24th, National City Bank was bought out by PNC for $5.2 billion, and they used $7.7 billion of TARP funds. Did Treasury give PNC $7.7 billion of TARP funds?
PNC has not yet received any money from the Treasury Department.
Did they agree to give them $7.7 billion?
We have not. PNC has publicly stated that they received preliminary approval. Again, Congressman, the reason I'm speaking this way
isn't there a yes or no answer here?
We have a very strict process for how we disclose information about individual institutions, and I want to respect those institutions.
You're testifying before a congressional committee here. If you can't answer the question, then you have a constitutional right not to answer. I can inform you of that.
I do not want to put an institution at risk by revealing supervisory confidential information.
Are you invoking your constitutional privilege?
No, sir.
Since you're not, you're saying that you cannot tell this committee what actually went on.
I can tell you, Congressman, that first of all, when a bank submits an application to apply for TARP funds in the Capital Purchase Program, that application is reviewed by its primary federal regulator, and then that regulator makes a recommendation to Treasury. I can tell you that we've never received an application from National City Bank to the Treasury to apply for TARP funds. And when we do receive recommendations from the regulators, we look very closely at those recommendations.
You're saying National City never asked the Treasury for help?
I've never seen an application from National City.
You have no knowledge that regulators denied a request saying the firm was too weak to save?
Again, the regulators do go to some banks that they think are not solvent institutions and discourage them from applying to the program.
Did you put any conditions on PNC with respect to the $7.7 billion?
We told, if a bank comes to us and wants to apply for funds as part of an acquisition, they will only get, if it's approved by the regulator or recommended by the regulator, they will only get the target share upon closing of the transaction. So there are conditions.
Can you tell this committee why you thought National City was too weak to save? Do you consider the negative effects on local employment and ripple effects of more layoffs in an economically depressed region? I mean, you think about it. Congress, in its wisdom, Mr. Issa, and you and I talked about this, we fought for some provisions that would help inner cities that were suffering from the most foreclosure. Cleveland certainly qualified for that. Don't you look at the impact of your decisions on regional economies? Do you give it any consideration at all?
Congressman, we review applications that the regulators submit to us with their recommendations. If a regulator does not submit an application to Treasury because a regulator deems a financial institution is going to fail, we can't review it. And I don't think it's a good use of taxpayer money to put taxpayer capital into a financial institution that's going to fail.
Well, you know what? That statement that you just made, you will hear about for the rest of your career. My time has expired. I'm going to come back to this question. We're going to go to Mr. Issa.
Well, we won't just come back to it. I think we'll stay with it for a moment. PNC's going to buy, as announced, a price, and they're going to buy National City Bank. If they don't have your implicit money, then they must be doing it with their own money. Now, if they do have your implicit support, then that means that, in fact, a little bit like a Goldman Sachs deal, they have the assurances that they have the money to go do a deal. They go do a deal, and then they get the money at closing. Now, you're sitting here today saying you can't reveal, but in fact, if there's an announced deal, either you are going to provide the money or you're not. It's that simple. Now, I appreciate all the confidentiality and all those other statements, but we have a right to know whether or not there is an acquisition that is going to be done with other funds or the U.S. government's funds. So I'm going to ask you once again, in light of that, is that acquisition going to be done with the pledge that at closing they will be provided the funds they need, or are they going somewhere else for the funds, as far as you know?
Well, Congressman, generically, just please permit me to speak generically. I can be more candid if you'll allow me to speak generically.
I don't want to speak generically because we have certain acquisitions, Wachovia, obviously, and National City Bank. These are banks where both of us are shaking our heads, and by the way, I have nothing against the acquiring banks at all, but we're looking at the banks being bought and saying, if they got well, in the case of National City Bank, if we bought $5.5 billion worth of preferred stock in that company, would they be viable? Do you have any knowledge on that to answer that question?
Again, the regulators, Congressman, are making judgments on which banks they deem to be healthy banks, viable banks, and making recommendations to us. If a regulator determines that one of its regulated banks is not viable and they do not submit their application to us, then we can't invest in them. It wouldn't be prudent.
Okay, so you're basically following the FDIC's lead. Is that right?
Well, in this case, well, all four banking regulators, the Fed, the
Right.
FDIC, the OCC, and the OTS, are the ones who review the initial applications and make the recommendations to Treasury. We then look at those recommendations, either go back for more information or make our own decision.
Oh, you said or make your own decision. So you could make an independent decision?
Absolutely. Ultimately, it's Treasury's decision on who to invest in and what terms.
Okay, so at the end of the day, Hank Paulson gets to decide who lives and who dies, who buys whom. He could potentially have looked and allowed the opposite, the regulators to go in and say to PNC, we don't think you're going to make it, therefore National City Bank's going to buy you out, and $7 billion would have gone the other way. That could have happened.
In theory, yes, Congressman. Ultimately, the regulators are the ones who've been supervising these institutions, have people on site, and they're in a much better place to make recommendations to Treasury about who's a healthy bank and who's not.
Okay, well, let's ask the question that I've been wanting to ask. During the bailout debate, we had Bill Isaac, former FDIC chairman, who described to all of us, both sides of the aisle, very bipartisan series of meetings. As a matter of fact, Mr. Kucinich and I had never been to a Progressive Caucus meeting, but I got to go to one because immediately following we had a series of question and answers with Chairman Bill Isaac. In his time in the Reagan administration, he was granted and used a system of buying subordinated debentures, essentially, with the full in an exchange program that put $0 of the federal government's Treasury money in play, because it was a credit default swap, if you will, in its own way, using that. And that authority still exists today. It requires that the Secretary of the Treasury make a finding, which